Most of us hide our failures, but today you'll find out that God might have more purpose for your failures than you ever realized. You'll also figure out how to take a crazy idea and make it a reality.
Like church on a golf course. Today's episode, we are swinging in with Pastor Dan Chun. What a joy it is to be with Pastor Dan Chun here in his office, surrounded by books and all kinds of wonderful things that you've accumulated over decades of ministry. Dan Chun, thanks for having us with you.
Super to be here. So glad you're with me here in the Holy of Holies.
Oh, is that what they call this? I can see where all the work gets done and the brain trust behind First Presbyterian Church, Hawaiian Islands Ministries, and so many other things. Yeah, what an exciting time for us to be here.
Totally.
Super.
Now, Pastor Dan, we know that you've been doing ministry for a long time, and you've built Hawaiian Islands Ministries along with your wife Pam from the ground up. You've led First Presbyterian Church into unseen before areas of success and expansion. But take us back to the beginning, where you come to Jesus in the first place. How did you come to Jesus?
Well, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. Though my mother did become a Christian later. My dad had more of a Buddhist background. But my sister became a Christian in college, and I was a high schooler, about 15. And she shared with me something called the Four Spiritual Laws, a track from long ago. Bill Bright and crew developed that. And
wait, she actually gave you the track? That's how this started?
Yeah.
No way.
And other material too. And so I'm reading all of this, and I'm listening to people, and it took a while, but one day, actually, I know the date, January 5, and I was sitting on a toilet thinking through this, and I accepted Jesus on the toilet. So in my office here, you'll see these little figurines.
And you remember the date, like literally, this is the moment.
Yeah, this is the moment, January 5. Show you how old I am, 1967. And so, and it's funny because the track, Four Spiritual Laws, talks about take the ego off the throne of your life. And so today, like the Gospel of John has a lot of meaning to me.
Wait, this is for real.
First John, Second John.
This is just like
John.
a joke intro. This is for real.
This is for real. I accepted Christ on a toilet.
That.
So I tell people, you don't have to have this incredible testimony like, I was on drugs and I was drinking and I was found in a gutter and then I came to Jesus and there were fireworks. It can be pretty pedestrian and mundane, as mine was. So, all things must pass and it happened.
Oh, so your sin got wiped away? It's incredible.
Oh gosh, this is going nowhere.
Okay, so this is a mixed audience, I thought. But we'll see.
So you come to Christ in high school, but then were you called into ministry at that moment, or were there other things that happened?
No, but the bug really took, and when I was in college, I organized a chapel, and I preached at that, and then after that, no, I didn't go into ministry. I became a TV news reporter for a CBS affiliate here in Hawaii called KGMB News.
That's right. You were a reporter with KGMB News. Give us your best reporter voice.
Hi, this is Dan Chun, KGMB News.
That's really good. That's really good.
They changed my name because everyone knew me as Danny. And then the news director, Bob Seavey, says, no, that doesn't have enough gravitas. So you're going to be Dan Chun. So it just sounds better, Dan Chun, KGMB News, than Danny Chun, KGB News at the state legislature.
So without the news, you'd literally be Pastor Danny Chun. You think that would have
Yes,
stayed?
I guess so.
That's crazy.
But now, see, I'm reporting on the good news.
I couldn't imagine calling you Danny Chun. So you're a reporter, and then you go into ministry.
No. So I'm a reporter, then I go to seminary, and then kind of tragedy strikes. 2 weeks into seminary, my wife at that time says, you know what? I never loved you, and I don't love you now.
Wow.
And I was totally caught off guard. And so my years in seminary were my wilderness years. And of course, there were people saying, you shouldn't go into ministry and all that. And I said to God, if the Bible is true, if you're true, it's going to have to be true for someone like me with the sadness I'm feeling and the depression and the loneliness and the humiliation. Because imagine 2 weeks prior to arriving to seminary, my local church lays hands on me, they commission me, they send me off. And then 2 weeks later, my wife says, I don't love you and I never did. I didn't know anybody in Pasadena. and it was just horrible. So,
How long were you guys married at that point?
Only a couple years, I think. 2 or 3 years. 3 years. And fortunately, no kids. And so it was just a horrible time. But I think that's where my theology of grace and forgiveness really grew, because it was true for me. In fact, the day I got the divorce papers, I was so depressed. The next day was my New Testament survey final, and I flunked it. I got an F.
Totally.
My mind wasn't there. It was 50% of my grade. Fortunately, I had an A going into it, so I got a C for the quarter or for the semester. And but that was horrible. It was definitely my wilderness years.
Okay, so wait. I'm going to do ministry. I'm going to serve God. My wife doesn't love me. Divorce. Like, for most people, that would be the end. Like, how does it change to, like, where's it turn at this? Because for me, I'm like thinking, like, I didn't know this part of your story, so it's pretty wild. Like, wow, it's amazing to think you're here. And when I think about everything you've done in our islands, it's wild, you know? So, like, how did that shift? Like, how did you get through that? Because I think a lot of people, they get to those times and it's like, that's the beginning of 20 years of confusion.
Well, 3 years in seminary, and then I decided to go to USC Film School.
Hey.
Yes, fight on, as we say there. And because I didn't think I'd be a pastor, but somehow some people from Kalihi Union Church said, hey, you really should be a pastor. And I said, I don't know if I should. But my mind changed, and 4 months later, I was accepted to be the associate pastor at First Presbyterian Church as in Christian education. So that was amazing. They took a chance on me. Again, grace. I was divorced, wet behind the ears, no pastoral experience. Yeah. And they took me in.
And so what year is this when they took you in?
I was 80, and I was associate pastor 80 to 85.
Okay, and then you pastored at First Pres, for those of us that maybe aren't as familiar, straight through all the way from 85 until...
Oh, no, 80 to 85, and then 85. So this is interesting with my tragedy of the divorce. I then am asked to be a singles pastor at Menlo Park Presbyterian Church in California near Stanford. And they've never had a singles pastor. They said, start a whole department just for those never married, widowed, and divorced. And I remember I flew up there, and it was my very first meeting, and the very first meeting with about 100 singles there, most of them older, a guy named Chuck stood up in like the 8th or 10th row, stood up, and in front of everybody says, well, why do you think you should be our pastor? You come here married to, at that point, Pam, with pregnant with your first child. What do you know about our pain? We're divorced. We're widowed. We're never married. He said that in front of everybody. And so I look at him, I go, I'm divorced. And then he says, well, come on in then. And that started this wonderful love relationship I had with the singles. And in 3 years, we had 3,000 singles coming. And like my Sunday night Bible study with young adults were like 400. I mean, it was the right time at the right moment. And people were looking for a safe place where they could date, maybe find a mate, and get some teaching, like how to pick a spouse, how to date, and, you know, self-esteem and things like that. And so I often call that my Camelot years. I mean, it was just the best years, and I didn't have to worry about the budget, didn't have to worry about human resource, you know, and I just should concentrate just on singles. And we had divorce care, you know, we had 6 social events every weekend. It was a great time. And many of the leaders that I worked with back then, they're friends today, and they're deeply in ministry.
And so, I mean, I've only got to know you more in the last couple of years. I know, Brandon, you've known him for like a while longer. But one of the things that I remember hearing about you first was actually out of those years, that book that you wrote on singles. And so not to do like a shameless book plug, but I just think it's really interesting because I think this also speaks to your heart. So can you tell them like even why you did that book, like looking back and wanting to find out, and then just the statistics on it? Because I think that's really fascinating.
Well, I did the book because I thought... Well, I was wondering years later, like maybe 20 years later, like, what if everything I taught them about how to date and how to find a mate didn't work? What if they got as divorced as everybody else? You know, there's a 40% divorce rate, depending on demographics, it could be as low as 20%, but it's hovering closer to the 40. And what if it didn't work? So I surveyed 261 people who got married around the time that I was singles pastor. And I was stunned to find, as we surveyed them, only 25 were divorced. That's less than 10%, probably about 9.5%. And I thought, man, I should put this in a book. And so I did, How to Pick a Spouse. Yeah, shameless advertising. It is on Kindle, audiobooks.
Yeah, we'll put it in our show notes if those guys are wanting to watch it. Totally.
So, and so get this, I have enough craziness that I asked the founder of eHarmony, like, could you write like an endorsement? He goes, no. And so I asked again, and he goes, look, Dad, I'm the founder of eHarmony. I can't not give you an endorsement because that would be like too strong. So idiot that I am, I ask a third time. He goes, okay, I'll read the galleys when I go to my Kennebunkport house, and I'll tell you later. So later came, and I just said, okay, so like third time, I'm going to strike out, but what do you think? And he just said, sorry, Dan, I'm not going to give you an endorsement, but could I write the foreword? I like the book that much. And I will put in it, if people don't like it, I'll give them a free eHarmony membership.
That's wild.
Worth hundreds. So it didn't sell much. It probably only sold like 5,000 copies, and my mom bought those. And but it's out there, and it's helped a lot of people, and they said it saved them from making some stupid choices.
Yeah, we read it. Before we were married, my wife and I separately read it and then looked at some of the principles. It really helped us as we were looking at marriage together. So we appreciate not only that, but just your heart for the greater church at large. Hey, one thing I wanted to ask you about was, you talk about the desert season that you had gone through. And it's funny, at times like this, we can look back on those kind of years and consolidate them to a few sentences. But really, these years were dry and tough. And I'm sure there was that element, as you had mentioned, about disqualifying yourself from ministry. Can you speak to the person who feels like they're on the outside looking in about God's plans and purposes for them because of their past or anything going on with them?
Well, here's the story of that, is that years later, I'm a trustee at Fuller Seminary, the seminary where I went, that this devastation happened of embarrassment, failure, loneliness, depression. And during one of the meetings, they said, hey, tonight you're going to have dinner at different students' homes so you can get to know the students. And so I go to the assigned apartment with my wife, Pam, and the hostess says, I'm so embarrassed. The 4 students who were assigned to meet with you, Dan, they decided they don't want to meet you. And I'm like, oh, wow, like deja vu, PTSD, like failure, rejection, abandonment again. So she said, I just invited for the highways and byways of all these people coming. And so 4 other people just said, okay, we're coming for a free dinner. And so at the end of the dinner, I just said, hey, where do you guys live? And one person said, oh, I live at 250 North Oakland. And I said, that's where I used to live. What apartment? And she said, apartment 8. That's my apartment. She said, would you like to see it? I said, oh, no, I don't think so. And my wife, Pam, says, yeah, let's go see it. So we go to the apartment. I walk in through the front door, and this wave of grief and sadness just hit me really strongly. And I remember the place where I got the divorce letter. I was talking to my friends, Dominic and Cindy. And this is really bad. I've been just feeling this horrible deja vu. And then suddenly, like a tidal wave goes out and comes in, this wave of grace hits me. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. 40 years later, whatever it is, 30-something years later, I'm standing next to Pam. And at that point, she was my wife of, let's say, 38 years. And I have 3 wonderful kids. And then I said, and I'm a pastor now, the guy who's not supposed to be a pastor, and we had just left a denomination, and, well, this is going to sound like bragging, but it's part of the story. At that point, our church was the 18th largest of 10,000 churches. Like, I'm not even supposed to be a pastor. And then I thought, Pam and I started Hawaiian Islands Ministries, and we've trained like 80,000 church leaders, and I'm not supposed to be a pastor. And then I thought, wait a minute, the guy who flunked and got an F at this seminary, I'm a trustee now. So I guess for those who are beaten up and lonely, my story of grace, my favorite theme, was so true for me. I was so broken, and I'm a leader today, which is crazy. I'm more like a wounded healer if I can help heal people. And God did it for me. And so I just know he can do it for others.
That's so good.
Okay, so that's this like full circle close. So then you're in California, you have this like huge, singles ministry. That redemption moment you said was like, you've been married to Pam now 38 years, right? Somewhere around there. So how did you get back to Hawaii?
Okay, so sadness, my dad died unexpectedly.
Okay.
So we came back to Hawaii, and I was born and raised here. And for 2 years, we decided to work full-time for Hawaiian Islands Ministries, which is a ministry that trains church leaders. And we started that in 1983. This year, it happens to be our 40th anniversary. And so we did that for 2 years. And then First Presbyterian Church of Honolulu, that had me as associate, they had asked somebody else to be their pastor. And I had applied, and they said no to me. They wanted to hire somebody else. And that person said no. And so they came to me like, okay, we'll try Dan. And by God's grace, I mean, who would have thought? This year's my 29th year as being senior pastor. It's like working at Toyota. Once you work at Toyota, you stay there for life. So that's another, there's so many points of grace in my life. And so you never can get tantaran about your career or about what happened. I've had a great life and seen God do amazing things. But, in my best days, I'm very grateful knowing it's all grace and not because I'm super smart or super competent. I'm just glad I got to be part of the journey and watch it. And I have a great staff and great friends who really made it come all together.
It's amazing. Okay, so 29 years as, First Pres, working through in that. And so if you could stand back, because not everybody's familiar with like the story of First Pres. And so if you're just kind of pulling back, because you're looking at like almost 3 decades. And if you were to say like, okay, now that, because you're, a couple months away, actually, 2 months away from
2 months
actually the end of your run here as you retire, which is amazing. Congratulations.
Retire from that position, but
right.
Going full-time into HIM.
Right. So if you were to look back and say over 3 decades, here's just kind of the big things. If I was just talking about First Pres, just looking at First Pres over all that time, here's the big things that I saw God do in and through First Pres.
Wow. Well, first of all, by God's grace, in 29 years, I haven't burned out, and that's a miracle. And it's all God's grace. I should have burned out. It was very stressful at times. But part of it is, I learned from Bobby Clinton at Fuller Seminary that if you reinvent yourself about 5 times, you don't burn out. And so the big rocks would be, so I started in 1994. We were very much on a learning journey. We would go to Willow Creek. We would go to Disneyland with my elders to learn from Imaginarium things and from Willow Creek. At that point, they were pretty hot back then. And so one of the biggest things is when our church was growing so fast, about 20 or 30% every 2 years, that at one point we had 800 people in person, but probably 1,000 something if everybody showed up. And we only had 78 parking spaces. So that's when we decided to leave Makiki from a traditional tall steepled church and decided to buy a golf club here at Ko'olau. And that was like putting all your chips in the center of the table. Sorry to use a gambling metaphor. And by God's grace, we got this, and we've paid for it in about 10 or 11 years. And that was huge. I think another huge thing is that we got into the Alpha course, which was big evangelism, and that got us rolling, being sensitive to that. We got into Compassion International to sponsor child sponsorship for kids all over the world. Got into the charismatic movement. And so we're gentle charismatics, which is like crazy. You're Presbyterian. But I remember when we would teach about healing prayer, people were coming from Pentecostal churches. Like, oh, what are you doing here? You're like Pentecostal. They go, our church isn't training people on how to do that, but you are. So like, all right, come on in. And so all of those are kind of the big rocks. And now that through COVID, that the golf company that was here left after 3 years into a 10-year contract, we now have all of the 246 acres. And my big dream, though I'm stepping back, the big dream is going to be turned into this wonderful Christian science education center that will teach people about creation care, the creator behind the creation care, and lift up Native Hawaiian teachings or learnings about the land, and obviously into sustainability, the environment, which the evangelicals sadly are really poor on, and they're leaving it to, progressives or to hippies or whatever. And we, of all people from Genesis, when God told Adam to serve and protect the land, we're the ones who should be super environmentalists and protect, as God said, after the Noah flood, protect the people and the creatures and the land. And so that's a big dream. And then, so those are the big things. Then, of course, I want to help the homeless right now, put a dent in that problem.
So if you back up to just like so you're in Makiki, and you guys are growing, like you said, 20-30%, which is wild. Why do you think that was happening? Like, what did you?
Because I'm so phenomenal. No,
humble too,
and
right?
humble, very humble.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I mean, I have a very strong theology that whenever something good happens, it's we have to give 100% of the glory and praise to God. Not even 99%. We just can't take anything. So, boy, why did we grow so fast? That's really hard to answer. I mean, obviously, the right answer is God and the Holy Spirit.
Sure.
I think that's a really hard question, because it could easily drift into, because I'm such an amazing preacher. No, I don't know. It's just, I think it was a safe place. I think.
Let me ask it to you in a different way. From those years, what do you remember people saying about First Pres? So when they would talk about like, man, I love this church because, like, what are some of the things that you heard people say during those times?
Well, they liked the music. I'm into team teaching, so I'd say they would like the teaching, not because of me. And we had a good educational system, womb to tomb kind of thing. And we did try to pump out a lot of different ministries that address different demographics in the life stages, like divorce care and things like that. That's an interesting question. I wish I had all these wonderful formula. I think we were just very open to learning. So like when we tried to explore more the charismatic theology, we brought a lot of speakers in to learn from that. I think, I don't know, I got to think more on that. Sorry, I wish I give you here's the 5.
That's great. This is the whole point of doing this, right? Is asking questions. And
I can't give you here's the 10 tips to grow your church.
Well, no, it sounds like you knew your people, though. You knew what the needs of the people were, and you tried to address them well. And then it sounds like you and your staff put on the learner's hat and always said, how can we improve? Where does God want us to improve in what areas? So even when you look at different things, trips you took or the charismatic involvement, just saying, so what can we do? And I like how you made it very your church. It was your identity as a church. You're gentle, charismatic, where you brought the Spirit in, but did it in such a way that brought people in closer. I think it's really great.
And the charismatic thing's interesting because I was full-on cessationist. My wife, who's charismatic, she goes, "What? You were a cessationist all the early years of our marriage?" And I go, "Yeah, I was." She goes, "I didn't know that." Like, oh my goodness, she would have left me for that. But and cessationists, for those who are watching or listening, it's those who believe that the miraculous gifts were only during the time of Jesus and the apostles. And as opposed to, we could pray for healing today. And I was one of those pastors that, this is such a bad confession, I would go to a hospital and I'd pray and they would be comforted because of my presence and my gentle words. But it never occurred to me they could get healed right then. And so when I got more into it, I'd pray for people, even in comas. And by God's grace, I've seen 4 people come out of a coma, not right then, but soon after, and I would see people get healed in front of me on things like knees that weren't working and things like that. So it was, but I was pretty much a cessationist because of watching televangelists, and that was so offensive to me that I just thought it was so manipulative and they would want money. Like, if you give me $5,000, I'll bless you widows, and that would just drive me crazy. And they were here at this church once. I won't name the name, but they rented our church to do one of those telecasts. And when I heard him, I said to the producer, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you not to have him speak here again. And they got mad. They pulled out. We lost a lot of money, but there's integrity of theology.
And you've been in ministry for a while now, and this concept of burnout is quite prevalent, not only of ministers who've been in ministry for the longevity, but even for new ones who are kind of afraid of it. This seems like something that you haven't necessarily gone through in depth. Can you tell us more about burnout, avoiding burnout, and what advice you'd give to ministers now?
Well, I know this is going to sound really strange, but I have this theology of the thunder chickens.
I'm sorry, what?
The thunder chickens.
Thunder chickens.
Yes. So when I was in California, there were some people who graduated from Stanford University. And this one friend played for the Stanford football team. And the offensive line, the main five, were called the Thunder Chickens. And my friend played center. So he was in the middle, and there's a guard and tackle on one side, guard and tackle on the other side. And they were the Thunder Chickens. They were just really good. And what's interesting is that the other four were always worried about getting injured. But my friend said, no, I'm just going to play all out. And for 4 years, he never got hurt, and the other four got injured. And I've always thought about that, because many in ministry are always worried about burnout. And then they burn out. And I thought, no, I'm just going to go all out, but still have guardrails, and like never miss a kid's tennis game or event or award ceremony. And those are always high priorities. And I would say, if there's a choice of being an A+ pastor and a B+ father, I will always be A+ father, B+ pastor. Knowing that background, I would say, to be honest, I did work a lot of days and never have a full day off of Sabbath. But there's a part that it's like a wartime lifestyle. If you're at war, you can't always be worried about, well, I better work 40 hours. And if I'm over that, then that's not good. Then I get worried about it. I work too long. So I know it doesn't make sense, but going all out actually somehow prevented me from burning out. And I know that's really strange, but part of burnout, I think, is people are so worried about burning out, they burn out. Now, again, as you heard me earlier, I'm always into grace. And it's God's grace. I didn't, and by God's grace, I haven't fallen from grace, had any moral breakdown, which today might be a miracle of itself. But I clearly, if I was with a group of pastors, we really have to ask secondary and tertiary questions, because it's not as simple, just work 7 days a week. I mean, I'm not saying that. But there's an attitude, this is wartime, and we have a mission. And somehow in that, I'm protected, and God protects me. And the other thing, I've been gifted that I work fast, and I know how to cut corners. And so that means even sermon writing or whatever. The irony is, by the way, I hate writing sermons. I really hate writing sermons. Because there's an 8-year-old, there's an 80-year-old, there's a non-Christian, there's a veteran Christian, there's a new Christian. Like, oh man, Holy Spirit, take my one cruddy sermon and help these people. So, but, somehow it's amazing that it lasted 35 years as a pastor, that I didn't burn out. But I think because I have this wartime lifestyle brain and it's related to this, that I think just recently, a week or two ago, I was channel surfing, and I happened to fall on Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot. And it just happened, I was in the scene where she's explaining to the Chris Pine character the purpose or why the Amazon race was created. And she says this one line that like blew me away. I felt it was like the symphony in my head was going dun dun, just like it was really important. And she said, our destiny is to protect the world. That's the purpose of the Amazons. That's her calling. And I thought, why doesn't every Christian have that? It's our destiny to protect the world. And so I thought, wow, I think I've tried to live that way, that I'm here to help protect the world and help the widow and the poor and the immigrant and the imprisoned, the homeless. And when you have that, I don't know, somehow you get protected, that you're so into it. But you can take that the wrong way. Oh, golly, he's going to work 7 days a week, 90 hours. And, as you know, I work for Hawaiian Islands Ministries, and I do the pastoring of a very complex church. We have Kolau Ballrooms, which is a food service, which I'm chairman of the board, used to be president. And we have our acreage that we're trying to convert into this wonderful Christian environmentalist thing, and then running, the ecclesiastical industrial complex of First Pres. And I don't know. It's unfortunately like the other things you asked me. I go, I don't have a clear answer, but God protected me.
No, it sounds great, and I appreciate the honesty. I feel like sometimes people paint like a false reality and make it,
or
like
cookie
either
cutter
one way
thing.
or the other. Totally. And I think nowadays people are living in such complexity, right? And so I'm interested, like when you said some guardrail things, what were some of the guardrails? I mean, I know you mentioned with your, the kids' tennis match and things like that, but what were some of the other guardrails for you that really helped you navigate that?
Well, I think early on, and I forgot about this till recently, I would take every fourth weekend off. I wouldn't show up at church. And that was an amazing discipline I had. Now, as I got older and things got more complex and our kids grew up, that changed. And then I worked hard for our church to give pastors sabbaticals, including myself. And that would be 3 months off. It could be actually in 1 month segments, plus $5,000 so they could go off to the mainland or go somewhere, go to Oregon and read a book in a cabin in Cannon Beach or something. And I think those kinds of things happen. Now, to be fair, I was due a sabbatical during COVID, and I didn't take it because I felt the optics would be bad. And we were in panic zone. We were just trying to survive.
Mm-hmm. And then how often would you guys take sabbaticals?
It's every 7 years.
Every 7 years. That's
and I made that for associate pastors and now directors too. And
then on your next tier pastors, did they burn out, not burn out? I'm just curious.
My pastors in my colleagues now?
Like the ones that had the same access that you made for them.
I don't know of any of my colleagues that have burned out.
Dan, another thing that you had talked about regarding burnout was the community that you would have to surround yourself with. And you'd shared a statistic with me privately once before about ministers that make it for the long run. You referenced community and some other things. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think, and it's community, having a real good accountability group with you. And I do have a pastor's group of supposed to hold us accountable. So much as we reveal to them. And that really helps. And having really good friends that I talk to all the time. I think whenever I'm going through a tough time, I pick up the phone and I call. And they could be on the mainland and just say, I'm going through give me some wisdom. I'm going through a horrible time right now. And they've been so good in giving me great advice. And so that's super important to get through those tough times.
Okay, so you have all this going. So you're not only pastoring your church, I think a lot of people don't realize, because you have First Pres, you guys are in Makiki. You guys owned your building in Makiki?
No. Yes, we did.
Okay, so you have like our own space. Then we're going to take this radical risk and move over to Ko'olau Ballrooms, which I don't think people fully understand just how risky that was.
Yeah, that was scary. It was because, it was scary because we realized in order to have some money, we'd have to sell the church before we found a place. And that meant selling the place and someday finding a property and the purchase of new property would have to happen the same week. And so, I remember I was thinking, oh my gosh, that it was like putting all your chips in the center of the table. I thought of Mildred Martin, who lives on her Social Security pension, like, I'm putting her tithes in this. And if we go belly up on this, the guilt that I will feel on that. And by and the members are saying, and you better sell it to a Christian group, to a ministry, not to a condominium developer or 7-Eleven store. And that made the buyers even smaller. Like, I'm going to find a Christian community to buy, this. And it turned out Catholic Charities bought our property, and they're Christian, and their theme was to help the homeless, the abused, and the disadvantaged in the name of Christ. It was perfect. And they said, we're willing to wait till you find a property to buy. I mean, it was just a miracle.
Wild.
It was just a miracle. But, to be honest, people need to know that's not a peaches and cream happy story, in that you can imagine the controversy of buying a golf club and you're used to a tall, steepled, wooden pew sanctuary. And to be honest, I lost 16 good friends over this transition. They had very good points. I mean, when the 12 spies said to Moses, don't go to the promised land, and only Joshua and Caleb said yes, the 10 spies were telling the truth. There were giants in the land. There were enemies. There were cities you're going to overcome. Nothing they said was an exaggeration. It's just that Joshua and Caleb were right. In faith, we can do it. And unfortunately, Moses and the team believed the 10 spies, and they were like 3 days away from the promised land? For 40 years, they wandered because they blew it. They didn't have the courage or the boldness or the leading of the Holy Spirit in the right way. And so I do not fault my friends for saying the truth. Thus, yes, it is expensive. We'll never get a bridge loan, which was not true. We'll never get more than $4 million for the property you want to sell. Well, we sold it for 15. And there are all these things like, well, the DLNR will never say yes. Da, 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 da. So they were all accurate, but you can imagine the heavy weight I was feeling of Mildred Martin. Like, I could be so wrong, and I'm selling the future of our church. And I had a great executive director who did the heavy lifting and encouraged me, like, hang in there. I mean, he felt we could do it. I trusted him in that. His name's Ron Matthew. But he also knew I would be the one getting the arrows. I'm the leader, and the picadillos will be stabbing me. And I'm amazed I actually got through that. To be honest, there was one time I did get super depressed, but I wouldn't say burned out. It was episodic. And that was like a 2-month depression, so I want to make this fair. And that's when we left our denomination to join a new one. And the new one allowed us to keep our property. The old one did not allow us to keep our property. So it was a big decision. And I was afraid it was going to be a tough vote. The vote to buy the golf club was 2-1. 1/3 voted against it. But when we moved the old denomination to the new one, I thought, oh no, the old Presbyterians are going to go after me. I think there were only like 9 no votes or something. And it was like 99% boom. But I was so worried and so exhausted. And that when we got it, it's kind of like Deion Sanders. When he won the Super Bowl, he got depressed. Deion Sanders, a football player, in case you don't.
Head coach of the Colorado Buffaloes.
Well, I'm saying that for the viewers and listeners. And it was kind of like, we did it. And then I just felt bad. Oh, I also felt bad, again, episodic. I just met with some veterans who gone through some PTSD stuff, and that so drained me hearing their stories of like how they killed innocent women and children and felt this burden. Does God forgive us? So that, coupled with the denomination move, just to paint the accurate picture, it's not like I've never been depressed, but that gave me a dip for about 2 months.
Got it. So for most people, especially, I feel like because a lot of people, like, they feel like this like idea from God or dream or whatever is supposed to take a step. And the dream world is the entire community around you is like, let's do it, but it sounds like for you, it wasn't that, right? Mm-hmm. And so then now, it's been how many years since you guys have had the ballroom? Or the golf
2006.
Club? Okay, so it's been a while. So looking back from today, how has that decision affected the church and the ministry? Like when people look back at it? Well,
I think they just see all the possibilities, right? We now have a parking lot that holds 500 instead of 72 to 83. We have a lot of room. We are the market square, the town square, where you want the community come to you, and now they're here. And that has all worked out. The big one was hard. The banqueting company, especially with COVID, the pandemic did not make money until just recently. That finally is making money, but that helps pay for the utilities and everything now. So the business plan was right, but it just took so long to be faithful about that. So those who are listening know that sometimes you have a dream, but it's going to take a long time to just see any glimmer. I mean, look at Martin Luther King Jr. trying to get to the Civil Rights Bill. I mean, it just took a long time. So, Galatians 6:9 is one of my favorite verses. Do not be weary in doing good. It's just so hard sometimes.
And I think that's one thing as I've got to know you that I respect about you the most is that longevity and staying the course. And so I also want to just kind of bring in now, like, you weren't just leading the church. And this is one of the other reasons we wanted to tell this story here on the podcast is to really even understand, like, you and Pam were like the catalytic leaders for Hawaiian Island Ministries, or HIM, which it's grown to become, like, I don't know the exact data on this, but if it's not the largest ecumenical ministry that we have in our islands, it's got to be one of them, And so it's just like this massive thing. And so I'm just curious for you as you're like looking, because now you're at this stage, right? And like Brennan and I were, around 40s and kind of in that space leading in that. But just looking, it's like part of what we're trying to do is to understand on our islands. It's like, what's God been up to? And I just feel like you have this unique vantage point, not only from leading in the church space, but also like you got to work with, like you said, you guys trained how many Christian leaders in Hawaii?
About 80, well, including the mainland, 80,000.
Yeah, about 80,000 leaders. So you've got to see a ton of that. And so just tell me, like, what have you seen from HIM now, putting that hat on and just kind of like, okay, here's what we've seen, what we started, and kind of like the fruit over, now we're at 40 years this year, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the big challenge is because of the pandemic and other things, I think there's more divisiveness in the church than ever before. And more than ever, we got to keep the vision of unity and the whole body of Christ. And sometimes we can get so siloed, we don't care about the unity of the body of Christ. That coupled with we're committed to training the trainers. And by training the leaders, then the ocean rises and all the boats go up. And so, I mean, not to name drop, but I was talking to David Kinnaman recently, who heads up the Barna Group, which is one of the big research companies that look at Christian ministry. And he said, I don't know of any other area in America where one group for 40 years has been working so diligently to build the body of Christ and to train the church leaders as Hawaiian Islands Ministries. And but he knows how hard that is, especially now, to keep being faithful and to still train people and want everybody to work together. And that's our calling. We want the churches, the pastors, the leaders to work together. And it's collaboration, it's not competition, but that's so opposite of how we often think. We do get competitive as pastors, and we want to just build up our church. We don't care about the other churches. And if we're really going to have renewal or revival, we need all the churches in there as allies and friends. It can't be just singular. So again, if our destiny is to protect the world, we got to be together. So when we went into Normandy to win back France, we needed the French resistance, right? We needed the Brits. We needed allies. And more than ever, I think God is calling us, hey, everybody, quit fighting among yourselves. You're having a horrible witness. So many of the non-Christians see us homophobic and judgmental and hypocritical and not friendly and not caring for the poor, that we've got to reverse that, not just for show, but really in our hearts, really want to work together and do the gospel.
That's awesome. So I'm just curious because the generation coming up, it seems, is a little bit more collaborative. It's kind of less, just walking down specific lines. Not to say that the one before was, but you were really a pioneer, you and Pam both, of being able to bridge those lines and different things. And what I've learned over time is that there's a difference between having a heart for it and actually doing it. And so I'm just curious, as you're looking back, like, what were some of those keys that really, like, man, if you do this, this is how you really can cross barriers or really like come together. And like you're leading a church the whole time doing this, right? So it's not like you don't have your own stuff going on. But I'm just curious, like what's the stuff that's going to make people come together and actually be able to prioritize working together as they realize Jesus' dream for the world?
Well, probably the greatest quote unquote success story or fruitful story, since success is not a word in the Bible, is probably when we encourage all the churches to sponsor a kid through Compassion International. And for the first time, I just saw all the churches, the church leaders, rooting for one another. Because if your church, sponsored 20 kids and your church sponsored 100 kids, it wasn't like, oh, you got 100, I only got 20. They're going, yeah, 20 more kids, 100 more kids, and you got 5 more kids. And it was like we're all throwing the ball through the hoop. And we didn't care, what teammate was scoring. And that was incredible movement. And now, at least at that time and maybe today, we are the number 1 child sponsor of Compassion International per capita in all the states, not counting Colorado where the national headquarters is, or the international headquarters is. And so I would love to see that now, like with the homeless issue or with the environmental issue. And it almost seems like you have to pick up an issue on the outside. Because sometimes when there's a crusade, and let's say, 200 people accept Christ, there's a part of the pastor going, so who's going to get the converts? Like your church or my church, right? But if it's helping the poor, it's like, great, you're helping 50 homeless, you're helping 20, go for it. You sponsored 50 kids, go for it, and you're trying to help the INA, go for it.
Interesting, because a lot of times when you hear the unity conversation, I think people make it about relationship. But I hear you saying when actually the breakthrough was actually to find a common cause or thing to rally around.
Yes, yeah. And I think having that external cause gets us unified, as opposed to a theology like we should be unified because we're Christians, right? It just doesn't have enough muscle. You almost have to have something you're doing. And
that's interesting.
And that's why I don't know what will happen with the property here of the 246 acres, but I think the new evangelism discipleship model is, for example, let's work the land, get the non-Christians who are really into social justice. Let's work the land. And while we're working with them, they say, well, why do you do this? Oh, well, we call the land the project Hakuhia. What does that mean? Oh, it's the delight of the Lord. Really? Oh, yeah, Haku means the Lord. The Hawaiians say Kahaku, meaning the Lord. They go, really? And yeah, we believe God created this land. See, so it's still discipleship evangelism, but it comes from an outside, I call it outside, from a certain project when you bring people together. And because if I say, hey, next Wednesday, Dan's going to do the Gospel of John or something, it's like, I don't know, 30 people, 10 people would show up, right? But we're saying, hey, next Wednesday, we're going to work the land together. It's like, boom, we're there,
So if I could ask just a couple of questions on your scope. So like if you were to now take yourself out of First Pres or take yourself out of HIM and just somebody who's been able to witness, over these decades, God at work in Hawaii, what are the things that you've seen God do across our islands?
Or any big themes that you've noticed over the past few decades when it comes to the churches at large?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing that brings churches together is worship, right? And, we say HIM is about worship, hope, and tools, which spells the acronym WHAT. What is HIM about? But I think worship really brings people together. And it doesn't have to have a message, just worship. And I know in the old days when HIM used to bring in Chris Tomlin before he was the Chris Tomlin, and Lecrae and Switchfoot and, Matt Redman, thousands, would show up for that. And a lot of the high school kids today are young adults, and they say, we remember that. That was life-changing. And I think we undervalue worship. Just come together to praise God. And in that sense, it doesn't get competitive. But it also, especially for the smaller churches, you say, we're not alone. Look at all the brothers and sisters here.
What do you see coming up for churches that we should be considering as we move forward into new decades of ministry?
Well, okay, that's an easier question. Forward, I think, especially since we're number 1 in the country per capita with the homeless problem, we're number 1. No other state has many homeless as we do per capita. I think churches could get together with that. And so, one thing I'm interested in a formula is like River of Life is trying to get as many churches as possible to distribute food and build relationships with the homeless. And that's kind of like the Compassion International model. You go through the local church. And I think that also builds the heart of the local member to really not get intimidated by the homeless and love the homeless and build relationships. This is just not food, it's relationships, and share the gospel. That's all fantastic. And so, again, it's an external project, so-called external, but I think churches could rally around a project like that and really be an amazing witness to the state. Wow. The Christians really care about the homeless. They're doing something about it, not just quoting Matthew 25. Oh yeah, go help the poor, go help the immigrant, go help the widow, go help the imprisoned. They're actually doing it.
And so we know you've got a run still ahead of you as you're transitioning out of First Pres as the lead pastor, senior pastor, and you are stepping into him even more and running, ministry in our islands and wherever God has it. I'm just curious though, if you were to speak to, the believers in our islands or the leaders or people that are just like, we really have like a heart for what God has a heart for, and they might define that differently. And if you could just give them like a piece of advice or something, if you could just tell them, hey, this is what I would just tell you as somebody who's ran, for this long. I don't know everything, but if I could tell you something, what would you say?
My big, big, big advice would be, hey, gang, let's all work on our humility. Can we admit we don't know everything? Can we admit we've made some big mistakes with the non-Christians? We can admit, I can see why they think we're hypocritical or we're too political. That's a big one, they say. And can we put on our learning caps? And when we are with people, let's listen to their story. And then you can talk about your story and then talk about his story. But let's be humble. And I think in that learning process, I think the Holy Spirit can do amazing things with us. But if we're not humble, we're dead in the water. And humility would be so authentic. It would be attractive. It would be the aroma of Christ that Scripture talks about. And that would be such a major difference. And when a church messes up, God forbid, if there's sexual harassment or whatever fault it might be, we immediately confess it and say something went wrong. We're sorry. We're going to clean it up. And humility goes a long way, and humility is a silent friend. And imagine if you're humble as a leader, you can say, I'm sorry. My fault. Will you forgive me? I mean, if a CEO at a corporation is walking down and sees a secretary or vice president, says, the other day you said something and I was wrong. Boom. Like, when do you hear that? And so that may not be the answer you want, but it's really humility and the flow through of all of that. That means great evangelism, great discipleship, great preaching, because it's authentic. The reality is we don't have all the answers.
I think for a lot of people, when you talk about like money and different things, if it's like a property thing or different, because the thing that I respect about you a lot, and I don't think anybody realizes this, like Hawaiian Islands ministry, and this is TMI, totally no problem with that. But as I understand it, it's like you guys have had to fundraise incredible amounts of money because it doesn't run cash positive. It's been like
the conferences don't.
Yeah, the conferences and everything. So for years you've done this, and I'm really interested to hear you talk about money and how you've used that and flip it for the kingdom. Because actually, for me, it's like refreshing whenever I'm around you in there, where you just dream, but you use it for kingdom things. And so if you could just speak to like your journey of like as a leader and in the church, because a lot of times when you get money in the church, you get problems with people, right? People feel really weird around it. They don't like talking about both things. But I feel like you've been somebody who's navigated that really well for like the last 30, 40 years. And so how do you see money, leadership, raising things and doing things for the kingdom?
Well, I think the scary thing is that when God really gives you a vision, and it may be go small, like hiring somebody that might be more money than you would have hoped, or doing a remodel, doing a building. I think you really have to be on your knees and have the humility that, yeah, you're not capable of raising this. But if God says, I'm giving you a green light, then you have to have the courage and boldness to do that. Now, part two is when you talk to donors, possible donors, prospective donors, always come to find out what their vision is for life. And if you can fulfill their vision and it happens to align with yours, then you're going to raise a lot of money. And I think too often we go to people and say, this is my vision. And they go, I don't care. And they're not going to give anything. So you're just looking like, I remember talking to this woman. I wanted to ask her for money for HIM. And I said, oh, what really excites you about it? And she was saying some things. And finally she said, I'm worried about the youth. And then I could say, HIM has a youth track. And we devote big speakers just to talk to them. She goes, really? I remember I talked to a prospective donor, and I walked into his office. He goes, I'm just telling you now, I'm not going to give you a penny, not even a penny. And I give, he said something, I think it was $300,000 a year, and I'm all filled up. And I said, okay, that's great. So he said, tell me about what you do. And I said some various things, and I said, we do these things, and, we do classes on marriage, and we do for youth, and then he goes, you do things on marriage? I go, yeah. Like, so my son and his wife could go to that? I said, yeah. And he says, okay, how about 35,000? And I was going in with zero, because I knew it was zero. So you're pitching vision, but you're trying to find, and it turned out his vision, I didn't know, was young adults who are going through a tough time in marriage. So the big thing is, again, it goes back to the 12 spies. I think God says often, there's a promised land, do it, and we chicken out. And by God's grace, I've just seen millions of dollars come in because the vision was from the Lord. And again, it's not because of me. I don't think I'm a great fundraiser, but I'm just telling stories and what's on my heart. And if it aligns with their vision, they'll give. And I would just say to pastors, a lot of time, the budget might be too small and you could raise it because you could do more. So somebody could say to our church, I'll make up a figure, you have $1 million budget. And they go, wow, that's like really huge. Your budget's really huge. But often I say, well, that's a huge budget if you don't have much vision. But it's a really small budget if there's a lot more you need to be doing.
That's unreal.
So it's, I think if God's in it, he's going to fund it. And I mean, look at us. Who would have guessed we could have bought a golf club for $20 million and then pay it off in 11 years. And the poo-poo could be, oh, Dan, you just have wealthy people who go to your church. But a lot of people have given to it from outside the church because they could see the vision and the potential of what could happen here. And now we have a new theme, the whole environmental theme, in addition to the church theme, which is standard. And, I believe it'll be funded down the line.
So don't be a chicken, be a thunder chicken.
Yes, be a thunder chicken for ministry and for fundraising.
I love it.
And go all out with a wartime lifestyle mentality. And God will fund it. I mean, we have to believe he will fund what he's asking us to do, right? It's only when we don't do what he wants us to do that it doesn't get funded. It means a lot of time on prayer. And I know this is old school, but I'm a very big proponent of, I try to journal God every day. I write a Dear Lord, and I write the date, I write the time. And I'm just so grateful when you write all the things that happened that day and you realize the odds were against you and you never take it for granted. There's just Thanksgiving after Thanksgiving after Thanksgiving. And maybe, Brandon, going back to an earlier issue, I think I don't get burned out because I'm so thankful. I just know how bad it could be, and I don't take anything for granted, even the smallest little blessing. I don't take that for granted, and I'm chronicling it, so I have a document that shows time and time again what God has done.
Thank you, man. This is unreal.
Thank you for having me here. This is like
a treat.
Another blessing that I'll write in my journal today. I got to be with Brandon and TJ to talk about these things and talk about you, Jesus, and about ministry, and I hope it was helpful.
Very much so. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a great time we got to spend with Pastor Dan Chun as he unloaded decades of wisdom in leadership. So thankful for him. If you'd like to know more about what Pastor Dan is up to, especially with HIM, Hawaiian Islands Ministries, check out the resources located in the show notes.
Yeah, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe if you want to continue to hear stories of what God has been doing throughout all of Hawaii. Well, that's it for today. We will see you on the next episode of the Kingdom Collective podcast.